Have you ever paused to wonder why so many faithful throughout the centuries have worn a small piece of brown cloth over their hearts with such fervor and devotion? The story of Our Lady of Mount Carmel is one of the most beautiful and moving traditions in the Catholic Church. From the slopes of Mount Carmel in the Holy Land to the farthest corners of the world, the devotion to the Virgin of Carmel has transcended boundaries, cultures, and generations, carrying with it promises of maternal protection, spiritual comfort, and eternal salvation for those who, with sincere faith, embrace her motherly care. Chapter 1. The Biblical Origins of Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel, which means garden or vineyard of God, rises majestically over the Mediterranean coast in present-day Israel. It stands as a silent witness to foundational events in sacred history. This mountain, mentioned multiple times in the Holy Scriptures, was the scene of the miraculous confrontation between the prophet Elijah and the priests of Baal. In this defining moment, God manifested his power and presence through fire that descended from heaven and consumed the sacrifice prepared by the prophet. In this sacred place, Elijah beheld that small cloud rising from the sea, no larger than a man's hand, that brought with it the long-awaited rain after years of drought. The Church Fathers saw in this cloud a prefiguration of the Blessed Virgin Mary, who would bring the world the Savior, like rain of grace, after the spiritual drought of humanity. This prophetic interpretation established an indissoluble bond between Mount Carmel and the mother of the Redeemer. Over the centuries, Mount Carmel became a retreat for hermits and contemplatives seeking to follow Elijah's example in his zeal for the Lord. These men of prayer built a small chapel dedicated to Mary, whom they venerated as the Lady of the place. Thus began, in a simple yet profound manner, a devotion that, over time, would spread throughout the Catholic world. The spirituality that blossomed on these slopes was marked by three fundamental elements: contemplation in solitude, continuous prayer, and a special devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. This spiritual triad configured from the beginning the Carmelite charism, laying the foundations for what would later become one of the most influential and fruitful religious orders in the Church. When the Crusaders arrived in the Holy Land, they encountered these hermits of Carmel and were impressed by their lives of austerity and prayer. Some of them, upon returning to Europe, took with them the seed of this Marian devotion, planting it in the hearts of Western Christianity, thus contributing to its universal spread. Mount Carmel ceased to be merely a geographical location, evolving into a spiritual symbol of encounter with God under the maternal protection of Mary. Chapter 2. The Apparition and the Scapular. The pivotal moment in the history of devotion to Our Lady of Mount Carmel occurred on July 16, 1251, when Saint Simon Stock, then general of the Carmelite order, fervently raised his pleas to the Virgin amid the challenges faced by the order. In the midst of his prayer, the Blessed Virgin appeared to him, surrounded by angels, holding in her hands the holy scapular. She uttered those words, which have resonated through the ages: "Receive, my dearest son, this scapular of your order, a sign of my fraternity, a privilege for you and all Carmelites. Whoever dies clothed with it shall not suffer eternal fire. It is a sign of salvation, protection in dangers, and an alliance of peace." This miraculous event transformed forever the Carmelite devotion. The scapular, which was originally part of the monastic habit, became a visible sign of Mary's maternal protection and a spiritual link between the Virgin and her devotees. It was not merely a magical amulet, but rather a sacramental expression of an inner reality, the consecration to Mary and trust in her motherly intercession. The news of this apparition and the promise tied to the scapular quickly spread throughout Christendom, Kings and peasants, nobles and commoners, clergy and lay people all sought to benefit from this heavenly protection. Thus, the scapular became one of the most popular and widespread sacramentals in the Catholic Church, lovingly worn by millions over the centuries. To facilitate everyday use, over time, lay people were allowed to wear a smaller version, 2 small pieces of brown cloth connected by ribbons worn over the shoulders. This adaptation allowed the devotion to spread even further without losing its spiritual essence. The scapular served as a constant reminder to its wearer of their filial relationship with Mary and their commitment to live according to the evangelical values. The Church, recognizing the spiritual value of this devotion, has confirmed it through numerous papal documents over the centuries. Popes like Benedict XIV, Saint Pius X, and Saint John Paul II have exalted the spiritual benefits of the scapular and have encouraged the faithful to wear it as a sign of their Marian consecration. Thus, what began as a private revelation to a Carmelite saint became the spiritual heritage of the entire universal church. Chapter 3. The prophet Elijah and his connection to the virgin centuries before the birth of the Blessed Virgin Mary. The prophet Elijah was already preparing the way for her veneration at Mount Carmel. This man of God, whose name means Yahweh is my God, is considered the spiritual father and founder of the Carmelites, not by formally establishing a religious order, but by embodying a contemplative spirit and a burning zeal for the Lord, characteristics that would later define the Carmelite charism. The Holy Scripture recounts how Elijah, after his victory over the priests of Baal, ascended to the summit of Mount Carmel and, prostrating himself on the ground, placed his face between his knees in deep prayer. From there, he sent his servant to look toward the sea. After 7 attempts, the servant saw a small cloud rising from the sea, like a man's hand. That small cloud, which brought abundant rain after 3.5 years of drought, was interpreted by the Church Fathers as a prophetic symbol of the Virgin Mary, who would bring into the world the Savior, a rain of grace for the thirsty humanity. This typological interpretation established a spiritual link between the prophet Elijah and the future mother of the Redeemer. The contemplative spirit of Elijah, his retreat into the desert, his miraculous sustenance, and his ascension to heaven in a chariot of fire, all prefigured elements of Marian spirituality that would flourish centuries later in the very same location. The Carmelites would see Elijah not only as a prophet from the Old Testament, but as a precursor to the devotion to Mary. Traditionally, it is recorded that after the ascension of the Lord, some disciples, captivated by the figure of the mother of Jesus, withdrew to Mount Carmel to live in contemplation, following the example set by Elijah. These early hermits constructed an oratory dedicated to the Virgin Mary, whom they venerated as the Lady of the Place, or the Flower of Carmel. Thus, the spirit of Elijah found continuity in the Marian devotion of these first Carmelites. The bond between Elijah and Our Lady of Mount Carmel has remained alive in iconography and in Carmelite spirituality. Many artistic representations depict the prophet Elijah receiving divine inspiration while contemplating a vision of the Virgin with the child. This iconographic tradition expresses the belief that Elijah's prophetic spirit already foresaw the mystery of the Incarnation and the role of Mary in the history of salvation, thus establishing a spiritual bridge between the Old Testament and the New Testament on the sacred mountain of Carmel. Chapter 4. The Order of the Carmelites. The seed planted by those first hermits dwelling in the caves of Mount Carmel would eventually grow into one of the most important religious orders in the Catholic Church. In the early 13th century, Saint Brocard, regarded as the first general prior of the Carmelites, requested a rule of life from the Patriarch of Jerusalem, Saint Albert, to structure the communal existence of those solitaries. Hence, the Order of the Brothers of the Blessed Virgin Mary of Mount Carmel was officially born. This primitive rule, approved around 1209, established the foundations of Carmelite life: continuous prayer, silence, austerity, manual labor, and a special devotion to the Most Holy Virgin. The hermits of Carmel transitioned from a primarily eremitic life to a cenobitic mode of living, without losing their contemplative essence. The Virgin Mary was not just the patroness of the order, but also their model for inner life and total surrender to God. The difficulties that arose after the fall of the Crusader states in the Holy Land forced the Carmelites to relocate to Europe in the mid-13th century. This move represented a critical moment for the order, which had to adapt to a very different cultural and religious context. It was then that Saint Simon Stock, elected General Prior, implored the help of the Virgin, receiving in response the Marian apparition and the gift of the Holy Scapular, which would renew the fervor and identity of the order. As the centuries passed, the Carmelite family would become enriched with new branches. In the 16th century, Saint Teresa of Jesus and Saint John of the Cross undertook the reform of Carmel, seeking to recover the original spirit of the rule. Thus were born the Discalced Carmelites, who, together with the Carmelites of the ancient observance, would form the two great branches of the Carmelite family. Both branches, while possessing their own characteristics, have always shared a profound devotion to Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Carmelite spirituality, centered on seeking God in silence and contemplation, under the maternal protection of Mary, has given the Church numerous saints and mystics who enrich the spiritual heritage of Christendom. Figures such as Saint Teresa of Avila, Saint John of the Cross, Saint Thérèse of Lisieux, Saint Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, Edith Stein, and many others, are living testaments to the fruitfulness of a charism that, born on the slopes of Mount Carmel, has blossomed in the most diverse cultural contexts and historical moments, all under the protective gaze of Our Lady of Carmen. Chapter 5. Miracles and Wonders, attributed to the intercession of the Virgin. Throughout the centuries, the devotion to Our Lady of Mount Carmel has been accompanied by numerous testimonies of favors, graces, and miracles obtained through her powerful intercession. These accounts, passed down from generation to generation, have helped to spread and strengthen the trust of the faithful in the maternal protection of the Virgin of Carmel. From unexplainable healings to miraculous protections in dangerous situations, the mantle of the Virgin seems to extend over her devotees with special preference. One of the most well-known and documented miracles took place in England in the 13th century, shortly after the Virgin appeared to St. Simon Stock. An English nobleman, a staunch enemy of the Carmelites, found himself gravely ill and on the verge of death. In a dream, the Virgin of Carmel appeared to him, rebuking him for his hostility towards her children, and threatening him with severe punishment if he did not change his attitude. Upon awakening, the nobleman, repentant, summoned the Carmelites, reconciled with them, received the scapular, and miraculously recovered his health. This account, recorded in the chronicles of the order, was the first of a long series of conversions and healings attributed to the intercession of the Lady of Carmel. Particularly significant are the testimonies related to the Virgin's protection in moments of imminent danger. Numerous accounts of sailors saved from shipwrecks, soldiers protected in the midst of battles, or individuals rescued from fires and other natural disasters, always attribute their salvation to the intervention of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, invoked with faith in times of need. These testimonies explain why the Virgin of Carmel is especially revered as the patroness of sailors and a protector in times of peril. The history of the Carmelite order is also filled with miraculous interventions from their heavenly patroness. In critical moments for the survival of the order, such as during religious persecutions in England, the suppression of religious orders in various European countries, or the difficulties during the Teresian reform, The Carmelites experienced the special protection of their mother, allowing the Carmelite charism to survive and flourish despite the adversities. In recent times, countless testimonies of graces received through devotion to the Scapular of Carmel have emerged. Conversions, family reconciliations, solutions to seemingly unsolvable problems, comfort in moments of affliction. The maternal care of Our Lady of Mount Carmel seems to manifest itself in multiple ways in the everyday lives of her devotees, not always through extraordinary events, but also through those small graces that quietly transform the lives of those who trust in her intercession. These testimonies, though not all reach the status of formally recognized miracles, nourish the faith of the Christian community and keep the devotion to Our Lady of Mount Carmel alive through the ages. Chapter 6. The Scapular as a Promise of Salvation. The gift of the Brown Scapular is inextricably linked to a promise of eternal salvation, a promise that has comforted and strengthened countless faithful throughout the centuries. According to tradition, the Virgin Mary promised Saint Simon Stock that whoever dies wearing this scapular will not suffer eternal fire. This promise, known as the Carmelite privilege, has been the subject of profound theological and spiritual reflection in the history of the Church, to understand its significance within the economy of salvation. Later, this first promise was accompanied by what is known as the Saturday privilege, revealed by the Virgin Mary to Pope John XIII. This privilege states that Mary would release from purgatory, the Saturday following their death, those who had devoutly worn the scapular, maintained chastity according to their state, and recited the little office of the Virgin. This privilege was documented in the papal bull Sacratissimo Uti Culmine from 1322. And while some scholars have questioned its historical authenticity, it has been confirmed in its spiritual value by multiple later papal documents. It is crucial to understand that these promises should not be interpreted in a superstitious or mechanical way. The Church has always taught that the scapular is not an automatic pass to heaven, nor does it exempt Christians from the responsibility of living according to the gospel. The promises linked to the scapular must be understood in the context of an authentic life of faith, of Marian affiliation, and of a continuous effort toward conversion. The scapular serves as an external sign of an internal reality, the consecration to Mary, and trust in her maternal protection, especially at the decisive moment of death. St. John Paul II, a great devotee of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, explained the deep meaning of the scapular, saying that it is essentially a habit. Whoever receives it becomes attached or associated in a more or less intimate degree to the Order of Carmel, consecrated to the Most Holy Virgin and placed under her maternal protection. This spiritual bond with Mary, symbolized by the scapular, is what underpins the confidence in her special assistance at the time of death and after it. Therefore, the devotional practice of the scapular should be accompanied by a sincere effort to imitate the virtues of Mary, her unwavering faith, her obedience to the divine will, her purity of heart, her humility, and her charity. Only then does the external sign of the scapular become an authentic expression of a Marian life that prepares the Christian for the ultimate encounter with Christ. The promise of salvation linked to the scapular is, in the end, yet another manifestation of Mary's maternal concern, who does not abandon her children even after death and leads them safely to their heavenly homeland. Chapter 7. Our Lady of Mount Carmel as Patroness of Sailors. Among the various invocations and patronages of the Virgin Mary, her veneration as Our Lady of Mount Carmel stands out particularly as the patroness of those who venture upon the seas. This association between Our Lady of Mount Carmel and sailors has roots deeply embedded in the very geography of Mount Carmel, which rises majestically along the shores of the Mediterranean, serving as a reference point and spiritual beacon for navigators since time immemorial. Tradition recounts how the Carmelites who lived on Mount Carmel used to light bonfires on nights to guide the ships approaching the shore. These physical lights were complemented by the spiritual illumination of their prayers for sailors under the protection of the Lady of Carmel. Over time, sailors began to invoke the Virgin under this title in moments of danger, and many testimonies of miraculous rescues at sea contributed to solidifying this maritime devotion. When the Carmelites moved to Europe in the 13th century, they brought this connection between their patroness and seafarers with them. In the ports where they established Carmelite convents, the devotion to Our Lady of Mount Carmel particularly flourished among fishing and maritime communities. The Brown Scapular became an essential part of the gear of every Christian sailor, while images of the Virgin adorned the chapels of the ports and the cabins of the vessels, particularly in Catholic countries with a rich maritime tradition like Spain, Portugal, Italy, and various Latin American nations. Our Lady of Mount Carmel is venerated with profound fervor by the people of the sea. The maritime processions in her honor, where her image is carried on beautifully adorned vessels, represent some of the most beautiful and emotional expressions of popular religiosity. In these celebrations, deep faith intertwines with ancestral traditions and gratitude for the protection experienced in maritime dangers. This devotion has transcended the strictly maritime field, extending to the navies and armed forces of numerous countries who have adopted Our Lady of Mount Carmel as their official patroness. Every July 16th, the feast day of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, ports and naval bases are decorated to honor their celestial protector with religious ceremonies, parades, and cultural events. Thus, what began as a spontaneous devotion among simple men of the sea has become part of the cultural and institutional heritage of entire nations, who see in Our Lady of Mount Carmel not only the patroness of navigators, but also the guiding star that safely leads all her children through the turbulent seas of life, to the secure harbor of eternal salvation. Chapter 8. Festivities and Celebrations in honor of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. July 16th, the day that the Catholic Church celebrates the feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, is one of the most vibrant and colorful expressions of Marian devotion across the Catholic world. This date, commemorating the gifting of the scapular to St. Simon Stock, transforms each year into an occasion for numerous expressions of faith and popular devotion, reflecting the deep mark that Our Lady of Mount Carmel has left on the religiosity of the people. Celebrations often begin with a preparatory novena, 9 days filled with intense prayers that open the hearts of the faithful for the main feast. During these days, the Carmelite churches and parishes dedicated to Our Lady of Mount Carmel become a sanctuary for devoted worshippers who gather to participate in Eucharistic celebrations, rosaries, and various traditional devotions. This period is also an opportune time for the sacrament of reconciliation, as many faithful seek to approach the feast with their souls purified as a sign of respect and love towards the Mother of God. The central day of the celebration usually begins with the singing of the Salve, followed by the Rosary of Dawn, and is then succeeded by a solemn Eucharist, typically presided over by the diocesan bishop or another significant ecclesiastical authority. The liturgy of this day is rich with Marian and Carmelite references, and in many places, the imposition of the Brown Scapular to new devotees takes place, thus perpetuating the tradition that began centuries ago. However, without a doubt, the culminating moment of the celebrations consists of the processions featuring the image of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. In coastal towns, these processions attain an air of special solemnity and beauty, especially when they are held at sea. The image of the Virgin, placed aboard a beautifully adorned ship for the occasion, makes its way across the waters, escorted by various vessels, from humble fishing boats to modern ships, all adorned with flowers and flags. The sound of sirens, The ringing of bells and the hymns of the faithful create an atmosphere of intense religious emotion, alongside strictly religious acts. The festivities in honor of Our Lady of Mount Carmel often include cultural and folkloric expressions, which reflect the unique identity of each region. Sacred music concerts, theatrical representations about the history of the scapula, traditional dances, fireworks, and communal meals are just some of the activities that contribute to creating a joyous atmosphere around this religious celebration. These cultural expressions, far from detracting from the religious meaning of the feast, serve to enrich it, rooting it firmly in the popular traditions of each place. A particularly significant aspect of these celebrations is their inclusive and community-oriented character. The festivities of Our Lady of Mount Carmel manage to bring together not only the regular devotees, but also those who may be distanced from religious practice, who, inspired by family tradition or the festive atmosphere, approach the Virgin. Many of these individuals, touched by grace amid the celebrations, rediscover their faith and renew their relationship with the Church. Thus, the celebrations in honor of Our Lady of Mount Carmel also fulfill an essential evangelizing function, bringing the message of the gospel closer through the beloved figure of Mary, Mother of God, and our Mother. Chapter 9. The devotion to Our Lady of Mount Carmel through the centuries. The devotion to Our Lady of Mount Carmel, born on the slopes of Mount Carmel, has traversed a long journey throughout history, adapting to different eras and cultural contexts, yet always maintaining its essence, a heartfelt trust in the maternal protection of Mary. This historical journey of Carmelite devotion serves as a poignant testimony to the perennial relevance of the evangelical message, which speaks to the human heart through a myriad of historical circumstances. Following its consolidation in Europe during the Middle Ages, the devotion to Our Lady of Mount Carmel found revitalization with the discovery and evangelization of the Americas. Carmelite missionaries, along with other religious orders, carried this devotion to the New World, where it found fertile soil in the spirituality of the indigenous peoples. Soon, shrines, brotherhoods, and festivities in honor of Our Lady of Mount Carmel began to spring up across the American continent, from Mexico to Patagonia, becoming one of the hallmark elements of Latin American popular religiosity. The 16th century, marked by the Carmelite reform led by Saint Teresa of Jesus and Saint John of the Cross, was a pivotal moment in the history of this devotion. The Teresian reform, while not altering the essence of Carmelite tradition, brought forth new dimensions to Marian devotion, enriching it with the treasures of Spanish mysticism. Our Lady of Mount Carmel transitioned from being merely a protector in material dangers to becoming a guide and teacher on the path of prayer and inner life, known as Mother and Beauty of Carmel, as Saint Teresa would refer to her. The 17th and 18th centuries, during the height of the brotherhoods and congregations of Carmel, witnessed an extraordinary expansion of popular devotion. In this period, many of the traditions that still characterize Carmelite devotion today became firmly established. Novenas, triduum, processions, and other expressions of popular piety that drew the figure of Our Lady of Mount Carmel closer to the working class. It was also during this time that the Carmelite iconography fully developed, showcasing the Virgin delivering the Brown Scapular, or depicted as a crowned queen holding the child Jesus, images that became familiar in churches and Christian homes around the world. The religious and political upheavals of the 19th and 20th centuries, with religious persecutions, world wars, and profound social transformations, tested the resilience of many traditional devotions. Nevertheless, the devotion to Our Lady of Mount Carmel not only survived these challenges, but in many cases was strengthened by them. In times of crisis and suffering, many faithful found in the Mother of Carmel a safe refuge and an inexhaustible source of hope. Testimonies from soldiers who attributed their survival in the trenches to the protection of the scapula, or families who sustained their faith amidst religious persecution, keeping the devotion to Our Lady of Mount Carmel alive, are merely a few examples of this devotion's endurance in adverse circumstances. As we stand on the threshold of the third millennium, after the Second Vatican Council and its renewal of spirituality and liturgy, the devotion to Our Lady of Mount Carmel has adeptly adapted to modern times, without losing its identity. The brotherhoods and congregations of Carmel, rejuvenated in their spirit and methodology, continue to be privileged channels for the community experience of devotion. The Carmelite shrines continue to attract pilgrims of all ages and social backgrounds, and the Brown Scapular remains one of the most cherished sacramentals among the faithful, now understood with a deeper awareness of its spiritual meaning. Chapter 10. Carmelite Saints and Their Relationship with the Virgin Mary. The Carmelite family has gifted the Church with an extraordinary number of saints who have exemplified their devotion to Our Lady of Mount Carmel. These saints have become luminous witnesses to the spiritual fruitfulness of this Marian devotion. Their lives, writings, and mystical experiences form a precious treasure that enriches the understanding of Carmelite spirituality and deepens the filial relationship with the Mother of God. Saint Teresa of Jesus, the great reformer of Carmel, occupies a prominent place in this constellation of Carmelite saints. Her love for the Virgin Mary permeates all aspects of her life and work. For Teresa, Mary was not merely a model to imitate, but a living and active presence in her spiritual journey. In her autobiography, she narrates how, after the death of her mother, she knelt before an image of Our Lady, pleading tearfully for her to be her mother. This childhood experience marked the beginning of an intimate relationship that would deepen throughout her life. In her foundations, Teresa always wished for Mary to be recognized as the true founder and lady of the convents, expressing her conviction that the work of the Carmelite reform was primarily the work of the Virgin. Saint John of the Cross, the mystical doctor of the Church and collaborator of Saint Teresa in the reform of Carmel, also demonstrated a heartfelt love for the Virgin Mary. His mystical poetry of incomparable beauty is filled with Marian references. For John of the Cross, Mary is the perfect model of the soul joined to God in a spiritual marriage, the one who has completely given herself and is completely mine, as he expresses in his spiritual canticle. His personal life was marked by miraculous interventions from the Virgin, such as his miraculous liberation from the prison in Toledo, attributed to the intercession of Our Lady. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux, known as the Little Flower, developed a trustful and filial relationship with Mary, whom she affectionately called Mama. In her autobiography, Story of a Soul, she narrates how, as a child, having lost her mother, she saw a smile on an image of the Virgin, an experience that sealed her healing from a serious illness. For Thérèse, Mary was primarily the one who taught the little way of spiritual childhood, a path of trust and abandonment that she herself lived and proposed to the Church. Her Marian devotion, free from sentimentalism, focused on imitating the evangelical virtues of Mary, her humility, her availability to the divine will, and her hidden, simple life in Nazareth. Saint Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, Edith Stein, a Jewish convert to Catholicism who died as a martyr in Auschwitz, found in Our Lady of Mount Carmel not only a spiritual mother guiding her path of conversion, but also the perfect woman embodying the feminine ideal that she explored in her philosophical writings. For Edith Stein, the Virgin of Carmel was the model of a consecrated woman, fully expressing her femininity through total dedication to God and maternal service to others. Her entry into Carmel was for her the culmination of a search for truth that led her from Judaism to atheism, and finally to the Catholic faith. These are just a few examples of the many Carmelite saints who have lived their devotion to Our Lady of Mount Carmel with profound intensity. Alongside them, countless known and unknown Carmelites have found in Our Lady of Mount Carmel a mother, teacher, and companion on their journey leading them to union with God. Their lives are an eloquent testimony that Marian devotion does not distract from the one mediator, Christ, but rather leads to Him with certainty, as the Carmelite tradition teaches, to Jesus through Mary. Into chapter 11. Carmelite spirituality in the contemporary world. In a world marked by the frantic pace of life, where the material often overshadows the spiritual and a crisis of transcendent values prevails, Carmelite spirituality, emphasizing interiority, contemplative prayer, and Marian devotion, emerges as a particularly meaningful response to the deepest concerns of the human heart. The devotion to Our Lady of Mount Carmel is far from being a relic of the past. Instead, it offers paths of meaning and fulfillment for modern men and women. The central message of Carmel, the call to live for the sake of Jesus Christ under the maternal protection of Mary, resonates with the quest for authenticity and meaning that characterizes many in our time. In a society abundant in superficial or syncretistic spiritual proposals, Carmelite spirituality offers a path tested by centuries of experience, leading to true inner freedom and a personal encounter with God, hand in hand with Mary, the first and perfect disciple of Christ. The Carmelites, both of the ancient observance and the discalced, have adapted their charism to the needs of the Church and the modern world without losing their essential identity. Alongside traditional forms of Carmelite life, friars, cloistered nuns, and members of the Third Order, new expressions of their charism have emerged in recent decades. Secular institutes, contemplative life communities integrated within popular settings, Carmelite prayer groups, and lay movements embodying the spirituality of Carmel in various circumstances of family, professional, and social life. Formation in prayer, one of the specific charisms of the Carmelite family, addresses one of the most pressing needs of the Church and society today. In a world where noise and distraction hamper the encounter with God and oneself, Carmelite spirituality centers offer spaces of silence, prayer methods, and spiritual companionship that help individuals discover God's presence in their lives and cultivate a personal relationship with Him. The contemplative tradition of Carmel, enriched by masters like Teresa of Jesus and John of the Cross, thus becomes an invaluable service for evangelization in the contemporary world. The devotion to Our Lady of Mount Carmel, symbolized by the Brown Scapular, continues to attract countless faithful who find in it a path of Marian consecration adapted to modern circumstances. Without falling into superstitious or magical interpretations, the Church continues to recommend the scapular as a sign of Mary's maternal protection and as a commitment to imitate her virtues. In a world where faith faces numerous challenges, the scapular serves as a reminder to Christians of their baptismal identity and their calling to live as children of God and children of Mary. The growing spread of the teachings and spirituality associated with the great Carmelite saints has been significantly aided by the translations of their works into multiple languages, along with academic studies that delve deeply into their messages. This process has also contributed to the modern revitalization of the Carmelite charism. Figures such as Teresa of Jesus, John of the Cross, and Thérèse of Lisieux today stand not only as treasures of a religious order, but as universal teachers of spiritual life, illuminating the paths of countless Christians around the globe. Thus, the wisdom that originated in Carmel, under the watchful gaze of Our Lady, continues to bear fruits of holiness within the Church in this third millennium. Chapter 12. The devotion to Our Lady of Mount Carmel in different cultures. The devotion to Our Lady of Mount Carmel possesses an extraordinary ability for enculturation, allowing it to take root deeply in various cultural contexts, adopting particular expressions without losing its essence. This phenomenon of cultural adaptation serves as a living testimony to the universality of the Catholic faith and highlights Mary's maternal capacity to speak to the hearts of all peoples. In Latin America, the Carmelite devotion has developed unique characteristics that set it apart from its European expressions. In countries like Mexico, Peru, and Chile, the celebrations honoring Our Lady of Mount Carmel incorporate elements from indigenous cultures, creating a unique synthesis of traditions. The richly embroidered mantles adorned with local motifs, ritual dances, offerings of native products, and mass pilgrimages that span several days are all expressions of a popular faith that skillfully blends Marian devotion with the cultural sensitivities of these peoples. Particularly significant is the case of Chile, where Our Lady of Mount Carmel was declared the patroness and general of the armed forces during the Wars of Independence, thus linking Carmelite devotion to the emerging national identity. In the Philippines, the only predominantly Catholic country in Asia, the devotion to Our Lady of Mount Carmel reflects the religious sensibilities of the East. Maritime processions in honor of the Mahal na Ina ng Carmel, beloved Mother of Carmel, blend elements of Spanish tradition with customs unique to the Philippine archipelago. The scapulars, often decorated with local motifs, are treasured family heirlooms passed down through generations. The practice of Carmeleño groups, lay persons committed to Carmelite spirituality, has created a network of communities that intensely live this devotion, adapting it to the circumstances of Asian life. In Africa, where the Catholic Church is experiencing remarkable growth, the devotion to Our Lady of Mount Carmel is spreading with its own characteristics shaped by African cultures. The bodily expressions in liturgy, songs accompanied by traditional instruments, and artistic representations of Our Lady of Mount Carmel with African features are all manifestations of a successful enculturation. In countries such as Uganda, Tanzania, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Carmelite brotherhoods are flourishing, offering African faithful a path of Marian spirituality that respects and values their cultural traditions. The scapular is cherished as a sign of belonging to the universal church, and at the same time, as an expression of a faith lived out in ways that resonate deeply with African peoples. Even in predominantly non-Christian contexts, the devotion to Our Lady of Mount Carmel has found forms of expression adapted to local circumstances. In Middle Eastern countries, where Christian communities are in the minority, Carmelite celebrations are experienced with particular intensity, serving as a sign of religious identity and continuity with the origins of this devotion on Mount Carmel. In Japan, Catholic communities celebrate the Feast of Mount Carmel with an aesthetic that incorporates elements of Japanese sensitivity, ikebana-style floral arrangements, tea ceremonies adapted to the religious celebration, and songs using traditional Japanese melodies with lyrics dedicated to Our Lady. These examples illustrate how the devotion to Our Lady of Mount Carmel, while retaining its essential identity, can manifest itself in a variety of cultural expressions, bringing to life the principle that Mary belongs to all peoples and cultures as the universal Mother of the Church. Chapter 13. Prayer to Our Lady of Mount Carmel, O Most Holy Virgin of Mount Carmel. Mother and Beauty of Carmel, we approach you with filial confidence, knowing that your maternal heart is always attentive to the needs of your children. You, who have been chosen by God as a privileged channel of grace for humanity, graciously hear our pleas and present them before the throne of your divine Son. We thank you, our Mother, for the invaluable gift of the Brown Scapular, a visible sign of your protection and of our consecration to you. May this sacred mantle that you have given us be for us a shield in temptations, strength in weaknesses, comfort in afflictions, and a pledge of eternal salvation. Help us to wear it, not just upon our chests, but primarily in our hearts, living according to the promises of our baptism and the commitments of our Marian consecration. Virgin of Mount Carmel, who from the summit of the holy mountain has been a beacon of light for sailors, guide our pilgrimage through the stormy sea of life. In the midst of the tempests of this world, be the star that charts our course towards the safe harbor of salvation. Protect us from the dangers that threaten our faith and Christian life, and obtain for us the grace to remain ever faithful to the gospel of your Son. Queen and Mother of Carmel, you who have formed so many saints in your school, help us to grow each day in the virtues that you yourself lived. Your unshakable faith, your confident hope, your ardent charity, your profound humility, your immaculate purity, and your perfect obedience to divine will. We desire to learn from you the art of prayer and contemplation so that our entire lives may be a continuous dialogue of love with God. Our Mother, intercede for the needs of the Church and the whole world. Look with special favor upon those who suffer in body or spirit, those who are far from God, and those who have lost hope. Protect families, that they may be authentic domestic churches where faith is lived and transmitted. Bless the youth, so that they may discover their vocations and generously respond to God's call. Accompany the elderly and the dying, so that they may prepare serenely for their final encounter with Christ. O sweet Mother of Mount Carmel, at the end of our earthly journey, fulfill the promise you made to your devoted followers, and come to meet us in the moment of our passing. Show us then, Jesus, the blessed fruit of your womb, and after this exile, lead us to enjoy eternally his presence in the heavenly homeland. May we, upon shedding the earthly scapular, be worthy of being clothed with the mantle of glory which you yourself have prepared for us in heaven. Amen.